I'm very grateful to Cory to coming downstairs. When we put this date in the diary, both of us had a free day. Now both of us have a very busy day. I'm going to introduce him. I'll have to leave after about half an hour. But you can see by the audience, Cory, how interested many people are, particularly our websites community and the summer school, in you. I don't really need to introduce you. You're Mr. Open, as far as I'm concerned. You fight for our freedoms on the internet. Right? That's what I think you do. And on that note, I'm just going to hand over to you, Cory.
Thank you all for coming and for sitting indoors on such a beautiful day. If I seem excessively sweaty, I had my yellow fever vaccine yesterday. So if I keel over, it's only the live virus coursing through my veins. I promise it's not contagious, except in 1 in 250,000 times they tell me. In case it is. So I have a friend who worked for one of the big consumer packaged goods companies. These are the people who fill the aisles of the chemists and the grocery stores, soaps and detergents and all sorts of things like that. And they're very marketing-driven companies. The way that it works is marketing goes out and figures out what people want, and then engineering builds it. So marketing came back from one of their brainstorming Ayurvedic yoga retreats and came to the engineers and said, we figured it out, we've got a surefire hit here, we know what the people want. They want detergent that'll make their clothes newer. Get on that, would you? And after unsuccessfully attempting to explain the second law of thermodynamics to the marketing department, the engineers got to grips with the problem, and they realized that non-technical people use non-technical senses of words that have important technical meanings. And so for this case, when they said newer, they didn't mean a state of localized reversed entropy. They meant it looked newer. And what makes clothes look old? Well, broken fiber ends. And it happened that the engineering department had been playing around with a hot water activated enzyme that attacked fiber ends. A broken fiber has twice as many ends as an intact fiber, so it would preferentially attack broken fibers. Your clothes would look newer. Now, importantly, your clothes were not getting newer, right? Your clothes were getting much older much more quickly because your clothes were being digested in the wash water. But, you know, as delusions go, the delusion that your clothes were getting newer was a harmless one. Harmless enough. We live in the, as far as textiles go, thanks to the labors of the trade representatives and the era of the WTO, our textiles are effectively free unless you count the external costs of children chained to machines thousands of miles away, and so throwing out your t-shirt a year early is not a big deal. But not every technical delusion is harmless. Not every mismatch between what is technically meant and what you end up thinking you've gotten has no consequences to speak of. Some of these consequences go very deep indeed, and that's what this talks about today. The world we live in is really made up increasingly of networked computers. It's not just the computers in our pockets, the computer on your desk. It's the computers that we put our bodies into. Car is a computer that you hurtle down the road at 60 miles an hour in. Boeing 747 is a flying Sun Solaris workstation in a very fancy aluminum case connected to some incredibly badly secured SCADA controllers. A modern building is a computer that you happen to inhabit the case of. Take the computers out of the building, it very quickly becomes uninhabitable. Leave them out for any appreciable amount of time in any of the places where they're building with very high-spec insulation and relying on the building's respiration being controlled by computers. That building will be permanently uninhabitable. It will be a teardown. And not only do we keep our bodies inside of computers these days, we increasingly keep computers inside of our bodies. So a little while ago, I was in an airport lounge. I spent a lot of time in airport lounges, and the first rule of the traveler is ABC, always be charging. So there was one mains outlet, and I made a beeline for it. I plugged into it, and I'm sitting there charging up, and a man in a suit comes over and says, "Do you mind if I use that?" And I was like, well, I did get here first. I had to charge my laptop. And he rolled up his trouser leg, and he said, "I need to charge my leg." Because he had a robot leg from the knee down. I was like, it's your mains outlet. There you go. But it's not just people who have prostheses. If you grew up with the iPod or if you grew up with a Walkman, chances are if you live long enough, you are going to end up with a hearing aid because of all those punishing earbud hours you've logged. And it's vanishingly unlikely that when you get your hearing aid, that hearing aid is going to be like a retro beige hipster transistorized analog hearing aid. It'll be a Bluetooth-enabled computer that sits under your skin and is probably technically owned by the NHS. And depending on how it's configured, it can either make you hear things that aren't there, make you not hear things that are there, tell Theresa May or her successors what you're hearing, or any and all of the above. That issue is becoming very fraught, and the pointy end of it is becoming more apparent every day. Barnaby Jack was a security researcher of some repute who died tragically last summer. The summer before, he'd done a presentation at an Australian security conference where he presented his work on implanted defibrillators. Implanted defibrillators are amazing technology. You go to the doctor and you say, listen, my heart keeps losing the rhythm. I'm having these sort of baby heart attacks. It's gonna kill me. More likely she'll tell you that. And then she says, but we have an answer for you. We'll anesthetize you, cut your chest open, spread your ribs, reach into your chest, and attach a powerful battery with a computer to your heart. It's gonna listen to your heartbeat. When you lose the rhythm, it'll give you a shock and bring you back to life. And doctors want to get telemetry off of those implants, and they want to update their firmware, and it's kind of messy to attach a cable to a device that's inside your chest cavity, so it has a wireless interface, just like everything else. That's why sort of our modern environment is kind of a low-grade microwave oven. And those wireless interfaces are not very well secured. It turns out that Barnaby Jack showed that from 10 meters away, he could hijack your implanted defibrillator and rewrite the firmware with firmware that would seek out other unsecured defibrillators and rewrite their firmware and so on until a specified time in the future when it would deliver lethal shocks to their owners. And this is probably why Dick Cheney's implanted defibrillator does not have its wireless interface turned on. And that wasn't an isolated incident. Last year, the FDA published work, the American Food and Drug Administration published work on medical devices and found that overwhelmingly medical devices are badly secured. Anything with a Bluetooth interface is almost certainly has the security code 0000 and so on and so forth, one after another. So here we are in a world made out of computers, a world where our bodies are in computers, a world where our bodies are full of computers, a world where a computer is involved in everything we do, and soon a computer will be required for everything we do. And that means that every problem that a policymaker has to solve, every problem that a business has to solve from now on, will involve a computer, because everything will involve a computer. And that means increasingly the regulation of computers themselves are going to be the locus of regulation per se. So all regulation is going to converge on regulation of computers. And I want to look at what that means. So we've been running a 15-year experiment now in regulating computers to solve social problems. We call it the copyright wars. And I think that by looking at the copyright wars, we can actually glean some insight into what the future of regulation looks like and what the special problems are of the regulation of computers as compared to regulation of other devices. You may remember the early days of the copyright wars if you're old enough. You may remember that there were personal computers, that the media that were sold for them were floppy disks, and the thing that we cared about controlling copies of were the programs that came on floppy disks, executable code. And so they tried all these different experiments to limit the reproduction of floppy disks. What they wanted to do was be able to distinguish the floppy disk from the shop from a floppy disk that you duplicated at home. And so at the factory, they would have a special machine in some cases that would burn out one sector of the floppy. And when the program executed, it would try and read that sector. And if that sector was readable, it would refuse to run. So the floppy you bought in a fresh shop, in a factory fresh package, would have all of its sectors intact. Only the ones that came from the factory would have this sector broken. Other companies tried other strategies. For example, if you were buying a piece of software that came with a 900-page manual, they may ask you to turn to page 450 of the manual and look at the third paragraph and find the fourth word and enter that into a field before the program would run, on the grounds that photocopying was hard and copying floppies was easy, and so on and so forth. And this gradually kind of leveled up into control not just of programs, but control of the files that those programs read and wrote, particularly media and entertainment files, games first, and then music and books, and now sort of everything, video and so on. And if you cast your mind back to those days, or think about all the copy restriction systems that you've encountered today, the thing that you'll immediately remember and the thing that you'll immediately see is that none of it actually works very well. It's all kind of technological rubbish. And there's a reason for that. It's not that the technologists who work on this are foolish, it's that they're on a fool's errand. So here's conceptually what this copy restriction stuff is trying to do. I want to to sell you a piece of media, say a book, I write novels, I want to sell you a book, but I don't trust you to use that book in a way that's consistent with what I think your best practice should be. And so I want to make sure that you can only use that book using in a constrained set of ways. And so what I do is I scramble the book. Now obviously you won't buy the book from me if you can't descramble it, because otherwise all you've got is noise. So I have to give you a program to descramble it. The program has the cipher for descrambling it, and it also has the key that it feeds to the cipher and combines with the ciphertext, combines with the scrambled text, and out pops a descrambled book that you can read. But the program tries to erase all of its working copies of that plain text before it exits, and make sure that you can't capture the plain text and then share it around or use it with another program. And so that's the mechanism by which it tries to control you. It fires up, it says, am I allowed to run, right? Is there a burned out sector on this floppy? Is it a Wednesday? Am I in the United Kingdom? Whatever the rule is that I've set for you reading my book, it sees whether you've satisfied that condition, and if you have satisfied that condition, it decrypts the book, lets you read the book until you're done, the program exits and it re-enciphers the book, or throws away the deciphered copy of the book, leaving you with nothing but junk. Now, this bears a kind of cargo cultist resemblance to what we do when we do crypto and security, but it doesn't stand up to inspection. So in real crypto, we have this eternal triumvirate. We have Alice and Bob and Carol, a trio who've been around so long that they're actually beautiful love songs about Alice and Bob and Carol. If you go to YouTube, you can find beautiful love songs about Alice and Bob and Carol. Alice and Bob want to send each other messages, and Carol wants to read them. And so how do Alice and Bob conduct their rounds so that they can talk to each other without evil Carol listening in on their communications? Well, they assume that Carol can get the scrambled messages that they send back and forth to one another. And they assume that because it's a good assumption, right? We have one public internet and lots of people are on it, and there are people between Bob and Alice who they don't trust, who might slip a copy of the message in transit to Carol. We sometimes send this stuff over the radio waves. The radio waves can be intercepted by anyone with an antenna. It's a good bet that Carol will have the text. And certainly it's a bad bet that Carol can't get the text. So if you're really serious about secrecy, you assume Carol's going to get the scrambled text. You also assume that Carol knows what system you use to scramble it, what your scrambling and descrambling method are. And that's because, like in every branch of science, there is no way to know whether or not you've done a good job with your crypto science without telling everyone else what you've done. Right? Back before we had contemporary science, we had something that looked a lot like it called alchemy. Alchemy was a lot like science, except you never told people what you learned, so you never found out if you were just kidding yourself, and that meant that every scientist, every alchemist learned for himself that drinking mercury was a bad idea. Alchemy stalled out as a method for knowledge creation. We have a 500-year period during which alchemy reigned. We call that the Dark Ages, and then we started publishing. We call that the Enlightenment, and what came out of it is science. And as Bruce Schneier says, the security expert, there is no experimental methodology for validating a security system except telling other people what you've done, because anyone can design a security system that works so well that she herself can't think of a way of breaking it. But unless you're the smartest person in the world, all you've done is made a security system that works on people stupider than you. So we assume that Carol knows what system Alice and Bob are using to scramble their messages. So Carol has the scrambled message, and she knows how it was scrambled. So how is it a secret? Well, the scrambling system has a key. And without the key, all you have is random noise. You need to combine the key, the scrambled message, and the cipher in order to read the message. Otherwise, you've got nothing. And so Alice and Bob share a key. They don't tell that key to Carol, and they're a business. They can go off and do stuff. And there's lots of cool ways to do key exchanges. There's dual key cryptography and so on. If you're interested in it, you should look it up. It's an amazing and interesting discipline. It's not hard. You can do it without maths. You can do it all just as concepts, and it's cool. And it's kind of the secret sauce of what a lot of the stuff in the world is doing. So let's look at the voodoo crypto of digital rights management, of digital logs, of so-called copy protection systems. I call them copy prevention systems because when I was a systems administrator, the way that I protected data was by copying it. So I think it's quite an Orwellian stretch to call it copy protection. So in voodoo crypto, you have not Alice and Bob and Carol. You just have Alice and Bob, right? Bob wants to send Alice his ebook, but he doesn't trust Alice. And so he sends her the ebook, and then he sends her an app that hides the keys for the ebook in it. And then he assumes that Alice will never figure out where he's hidden them, even though they're on her computer that she can inspect at her will, using whatever premises and whatever stuff she has. There is a technical term for this in security circles. It's called wishful thinking. Because it's not just one Alice. It's every Alice in the world, right? If you want to gain access to the app and find out where the keys might be hidden, all you need to do is buy the ebook. And so Bob not only has to be smarter than any particular Alice, he needs to be smarter than all the Alices, including like the bored grad students with electron tunneling microscopes and nothing to do this weekend, right? This means that these systems fall over very quickly. And once Alice has extracted the keys, she can get up to all kinds of mischief. She can publish the keys so other people can make apps that read the book and then don't throw away the plain text. She can publish the book in plain text. She can make her own app. She can tell people where to find the keys so they can do all this mischief, and so on. It's a break once, break everywhere fool's errand. And that's why over and over again these things fall down. So all of this stuff is of some import if you're someone who earns your living from the arts. And I earn most of my living from the arts. I make copyrighted books, and those books are sold by big publishers that are owned by giant German conglomerates whose main business is selling landmines. And then I take that money and I use it to buy my child's shoes. And so if you're one of the infinitesimal fraction of people who make their living in this incredibly bizarre way, there's some practical stuff about this that kind of binds on you. And you want to ask questions like, is this generating sales or costing you sales? What does it do to your leverage in the market and so on? Is it good for creativity or bad for creativity? But I actually think that since almost everybody in the world is not doing this, those are the wrong questions to get bogged down in, at least if you're not someone in that tiny little corner of the business. What you really want to be asking is, what does this do to the nervous system of the 21st century? Right? What does this do to a world made of computers, where you've got computers in your body and your body is in the computer? So that's what I'm going to talk about. What happens when you have technology mandates to solve social problems? And because the copyright war was the first salvo in this ongoing, long, long war, it's why I'm talking about it here. And to talk about the copyright wars, I'm going to bring in a United Nations specialized agency called WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, based in Geneva, New York. They have the same relationship to dumb copyright law that Mordor has to evil. They're kind of its origin node. And in 1996, WIPO got to grips with the special problems of controlling copies in the 21st century. And they created two treaties called the Internet Treaties, the WIPO Copyright Treaties, the WIPO Performers and Phonograms Treaties in 1996, collectively called the Internet Treaties. And the Internet Treaties set out a regime for limiting how people could interact with software locks, with digital locks. They said, you can't break a digital lock. You can't tell people how to break a digital lock, you can't share a key, and you can't give people information that might be useful for breaking a digital lock. And if any of that stuff shows up on any web host anywhere, or if the clear text show up on a web host somewhere, all that stuff is subject to very easy censorship without any kind of judicial order. You can just sort of point at it, send a letter to the web host and say, I aver that that is my copyright, please remove it. And in the United States, this was embodied in law in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, the DMCA. You've seen this. You've seen this video has been removed because of a complaint under the DMCA. That's the DMCA. In Europe, we got it through the EUCD a couple of years later. Australia got it through the US-Australia Free Trade Agreement. A lot of countries got this through their free trade agreements with the US. The US Trade Representative went around and said, if you want to keep selling soybeans to America, you're going to put your own DMCA on the books. Costa Rica got it through the Central American Free Trade Agreement. Hilariously and embarrassingly for us Canadians, we got it in 2012 through Bill C-11. And if you made dumb mistakes about what the future of the internet looked like in 1996, you are just barely forgivable. But if you're still making those mistakes in 2011, you are felony stupid. And it's an enduring shame that our government in the last parliament brought in Bill C-11. So all over the world, we have these laws, and they are the order of the day. Now, where does this get us? Well, what it means is that you can't reverse engineer digital rights management and you can't interoperate with it without permission from the people who made it, which is a pretty sweet setup for a company. And rather than trying to define interoperation and reverse engineering, I'm just going to give you a for instance, a counterfactual that might help illuminate this question for you. So for this, I want you to cast your mind back to 1996, and imagine that you are in Piccadilly Circus, and you walk into the Virgin Megastore, and you buy £1,000 worth of CDs and £1,000 worth of DVDs, and you walk out with them, and you go home and you put them in a vault. Right? Now normally when you put technology in a vault, what happens is its value nosedives. Right? Normally, like, sort of, it's worse than cars. You know, you drive a car off a lot, it loses 50% of its value. You take a laptop out of the shrink wrap, and it's lost 85% of its value. Normally technology is not a long bet. But here we are, 18 years later, you go and you open the vault, you take out the CDs, and an amazing thing has happened to those CDs. Because in the intervening 18 years, those CDs have gotten all kinds of new value unlocked for them. When you bought those CDs, you could do one thing with them, you could listen to them. 18 years later, you can rip them, you can remix them, you can use them as the background music for your student films, you can put them on YouTube, you can stream them, you can back them up, you can share them, you can use them as alarm tones and ringtones, and do any number of things. Because there is no injunction that says you can't rip a CD. There's no digital lock that you have to break in order to rip a CD. And so Apple and other companies made programs like iTunes that rip CDs, and then once the CDs were in your computer, they were infinitely malleable zeros and ones. Now take the DVDs out of the vault. 18 years ago, what could you do with the DVD? You could watch it. 18 years later, what can you do with the DVD? You can watch it. Not one new feature has been added to your DVDs in 18 years. This is actually kind of remarkable when you think about the path of technology. For a while, any given piece of technology nosedives in value over 18 years. You would expect the features available to you over 18 years to have expanded, right? 18 years is a long time in the history of technology, 2 or 3 generations in the history of technology. And all of the value that you could have had with those DVDs has never been unlocked. Because in order to rip the DVD, you have to break the digital lock. And because breaking the digital lock is illegal, whether or not you are doing something legal with the DVD after you break the lock off of it, no one offers that product. You can break the law and get it. You can go and download Handbrake or VLC, and I think you should. They're good programs, they're easy to use, and you're unlikely to get into trouble for them, and having your DVDs ripped to your hard drive is very useful, but you can't buy a product for it. It doesn't exist. Now, sorry, I beg your pardon. The entertainment, Siva Vaidyanathan is a copyright scholar. Or let me back up, sorry, I'm losing my place here. So, all of these features that flow in a healthy kind of way, that come so easily, you can think of that as kind of the right that was latent in the product when you bought it, that was unlocked over the years. And what's happened since is that value has been captured thanks to these digital logs. This value has been captured by the technology companies, by the entertainment studios, and so on. An example of how that actually works is I used to go to these standards meetings for digital rights management on television in the EU from the DVB, the Digital Video Broadcasters Forum, where we were agreeing what the specification would be for DRM on your digital television sets here. And I was in one meeting with a guy from the American Motion Picture Association, and he said, he was arguing that he should be able to flag a show when it was broadcast so that it could only be watched in the same room that the receiver was in. You couldn't use like a SCART retransmitter to send it up to your bedroom or run along cable and watch it in your kitchen. You could only watch it in the room that the TV was in. And I said, so explain to me what copyright system it is you think lets a broadcaster tell you what room you can watch a TV show in. And he said, this is not about copyright, this is about value. Watching a TV show in a room other than the one you're sitting in has value. And if it has value, we have a right to sell you that value, to hold that value or sell you that value. Now, Siva Vaidyanathan, who's a scholar of copyright, he calls this the if value then right theory. But you can think of it as the urinary tract infection business, right? With your CD, all of the value latent in the CD comes out in a kind of healthy, easy gush, right? With the DVD, each new feature is unlocked in a painful, slow trickle. DVD companies, the companies that make the products that are on the DVDs,
not only can withhold features from you, they can charge you for features that you would get otherwise. So if you want to watch your DVD that you bought 5 years ago on your tablet, you can do that. The way that you do that legally is you buy it again from the iTunes store. Right? So rather than get that feature for free that you get with your CD, you buy it again. They can also implement anti-features. So if you want to make a DVD player, you have to go and take a license for the key because you're not allowed to get the key any other way. It's not hard to get the keys. A Norwegian teenager named Jan Johansson, about 1998, I think, extracted the keys for a DVD from a DVD player in an afternoon with a few friends of his. And they've been floating around ever since. Not hard to extract those keys, but in order to do so legally, you have to get them from the consortium that controls them, and they make you sign a letter saying what features you will and won't implement in your DVD player. One of the features you have to implement is no skip. So when the advertisements are running at the start of the DVD and the no skip bit is set, your DVD player has to not skip. Right? This is not a feature anybody wants. It's an anti-feature, but it's universal in licensed DVD players because the DVD players have to take a license from the manufacturers who want to be able to enact this kind of urinary tract infection business model trick and harvest more pennies out of your pocket. So that's one of the consequences here from controlling the way that people are able to use it from interoperability. Another important one is that manufacturers often misapprehend the utility of their technology to groups that don't represent large commercial markets for them. So, for example, it's often the case that people with physical or sensory disabilities, either they or people they work with adapt technology to make it more accessible to them. And sometimes that technology adaptation then becomes more widely valuable to people who are temporarily able-bodied, because eventually we all have some kind of disability. Again, if you live long enough, you will almost certainly be legally blind, for example. As a result, being able to add those features on a kind of, this is what I need, let me put it in there, is a remarkable tool for allowing greater access and greater participation in public life for people who already start with a raw deal. Likewise, people who live in the developing world and people who don't represent the rich economic world often enjoy the benefit of being able to adapt technology to their own local purposes. And again, that sometimes flows back out to the rest of the world. So some years ago, a group of technologists in sub-Saharan Africa set out to create a version of the GNU Linux operating system that would work in rural schoolhouses where there wasn't immediate tech support and there wasn't continuous network access. And they called this version of GNU Linux, they called it Ubuntu. It's now the most popular Linux all over the world because it turns out that being in a rural sub-Saharan African schoolhouse without tech support is not a bad proxy for being just a regular person coming to grips with Linux. And so developing for that use case made it useful to everybody. So again, we lose something really important when we have this technology mandate that says adding features is the exclusive province of the original manufacturer or someone who has some licensable element in the technology. But the most significant thing that we lose here as a consequence of this, to me, the thing that I'm most worried about is transparency, because that redounds more widely on the whole population, even than accessibility, even than that consumer value, even than locally appropriate adaptation for use in the developing world. And to understand why transparency is a casualty of this stuff, you have to think about how you can accomplish this digital rights management trick of getting a computer to disobey its owner. Because by nature, computers it's not an easy thing to do to get a computer to disobey its owner, because that owner, whatever program is running on the computer that checks to see whether you're allowed to do something, that program is under control of the owner of the computer. That owner can shut down the program, they can modify the program, they can replace it with another program. And so in order to have a computer, when you say, please play me this DVD that I bought overseas, or please allow me to install this app that I didn't buy from Apple's App Store, or please allow me to run this homebrew game on my DS. Normally, what computers do when you say, please run this program, is they say, yes, master. But somehow you have to be able to trick a computer into being able to say, I can't let you do that, Dave. Right? This is a somewhat implausible thing. If you have a program, the I can't let you do that, Dave program running on the computer that's watching what you do, resident all the time, loads at boot time, resident all the time, watching what you do, waiting for you to do the wrong thing, and then kills that process, you will locate that program and drag it into the trash, right? HAL9000.exe into the trash. If the process monitor tells you that there's a process running with such and such a PID that you can kill, you will kill it -9 with prejudice, and away it will go, right? It will wink out of existence. We will not run programs that say, I can't let you do that, Dave, voluntarily. And so in order for these things to run, they have to run in ways that intentionally deceive the owner of the computer. Now, this is fundamentally incompatible with free and open source software. Free and open source software is software whose approach to development is the science equivalent of the, or the equivalent of science as proprietary software methodologies are to alchemy. In other words, instead of assuming that the software is right because all the smartest people in the world are inside your secret software company who have all looked at it and made sure that there are no mistakes in it, you tell other people how you make it. You publish the source code for it, you allow them to adapt it, to modify it, to share it, to do other things with it. And this produces generally pretty robust software. It runs one of the most popular operating systems, the Firefox operating system. It runs one of the most popular operating systems, or browsers rather, and it runs one of the most powerful operating systems, the GNU Linux operating system that underpins most of the routers that you use, as well as Android, BSD, which underpins Mac OS. All of that stuff comes out of the free and open source world. And if you can modify the source code, then all bets are off for I can't let you do that, Dave. Because whatever that program is doing to check whether or not it's being illegally killed, whether or not it's being modified in a way that isn't consistent with it, all of that stuff is tractable if you can change the source code, if you can modify the program to trick it into thinking that whatever condition it wanted to satisfy was being satisfied. Back in the old days, when you had to turn to page 900 and look at the fourth paragraph and find the third word, people would just open up that program and change it so it would accept anything. Right? And so the program would think that it had received the third word of the fourth paragraph of page 900, but it had just received, QWERTY, return. In the same way, if you've got an I can't let you do that, Dave program that wants to make sure that the code has been signed by the App Store, then you can just change it so that whatever test it does always returns true. And it will run all code as though it were code signed by the App Store. So whenever you license a digital copying system, an anti-copying system, digital rights management system, you have to, in addition to pledging to implement anti-features and not implement those features that the industry wants to reserve to itself, you also have to promise to make the technology robust. And robust in this technical sense means that it's designed to be resistant to user modification. It can't be open and it can't be transparent. And because it embodies a digital lock, if someone finds a flaw in it, it can't be reported, because that flaw could be used to leverage an attack on it that killed it and subverted it. And to see where this gets you, you can look at the example of Sony BMG, which is one of the big record labels. In 2005, Sony put out 51 audio CDs, 6 million copies of them. And they wanted to restrict the ability of music buyers to rip those CDs and reuse them in other ways, to unlock all that latent value on them. And so they made them as multi-session CDs. They had a little data session on the outside, and when you put them on, they tried to auto-run. And when they auto-ran, they exploited a vulnerability in Windows to patch the Windows kernel so that it could no longer see files that were prepended with $SYS$. Any file that began $SYS$ was invisible to the operating system. Any process that began $SYS$ wouldn't show up in the process list. Any file or executable that had that name wouldn't show up in a file listing. Right? Technically, this is called a rootkit. And what this meant was that you couldn't see it if it was there. If you wanted to see the I can't let you do that, Dave program, you couldn't see it. And what they did after they installed this was they installed a second program that watched your CD-ROM drive to see whether you were ripping a CD. And if you were, it shut it down. Now, it turns out that once you put a hole in the immune system of a computer, you get opportunistic infections. As soon as they released this, virus writers started prepending all of their viruses with $SYS$, because how does an antivirus program locate the files it's searching for? It asks the operating system, is there a file called virus.exe in this directory? Is there a process running called virus.exe? Well, if that process is called $SYS$virus.exe, the operating system can't see it anymore as it runs. Dan Brzezinski is, or not Dan Brzezinski, just blown my his name, Dan.
Ruslanovich?
No. What was his name? Dan. Kaminsky, thank you, Dan Kaminsky. God, Dan Brzezinski was my old flatmate. Dan Kaminsky did some very clever research looking at cache DNS entries, because these things made some unique DNS calls, to estimate how widely it had been installed. And he estimated that between 200,000 and 300,000 US military and government networks had this installed on it by the time the whistle was blown on it. So this is what you get when you say we're going to solve a policy problem by making a computer incapable of running a program that we don't like. You get this mandate for opacity. You get this mandate against reporting vulnerabilities that occurred. And there were legitimate security research institutes that had discovered the Sony rootkit but didn't report it for some months because they were worried about the legal jeopardy if they blew the whistle, because in blowing the whistle they would be exposing a system that protected copyright to subversion, and that was covered by the DMCA and the EUCD and so on. And so there was a longer period during which you could have this reservoir of infectious material spreading across the internet to more and more computers. And so that to me is the major risk. This is the true cost for me of digital logs. When you add digital logs to the system, you create the mandate for weak security. And weak security is bad news for everyone. The Snowden revelation included news about something called Bull Run in the US and Edge Hill here in the UK. And these are a pair of programs with an annual budget of $250 million a year, whose goal is to subvert the security of devices in order to make it easier for spies to spy on people who are taking steps to make themselves more secure. See you, Wendy. And in addition to this being incredibly dangerous and disheartening for people who care about network security, it also supports the thesis that every problem that you solve with by attacking it with technology, every policy problem you solve by attacking with technology, where you're trying to stop someone from doing something, converges on the same set of tools, undermining the security of a device. If you want to control how someone uses the device, that device has to be less secure in respect of that person. That person has to be less able to trust that device and has to be able to override the commands it gets at the console with commands it gets from afar from whoever it is that's trying to break this stuff. This kind of turns out to appear over and over again in the 21st century as you see people who want to do something to people who are sitting in front of computers that's against their interest. You get the same convergence of technologies to try and control how they use them. So for example, the FBI arrested a gang of 100 global ratters about a month and a half ago now. So ratting is a rat is a remote access Trojan. This is a piece of software that allows the attacker to hijack the camera and the microphone to log keystrokes, capture the screens, and also plunder the files on the hard drive. And what ratters mostly do is they target young women. They try to convince them to install a rat by tricking them into clicking on a link or downloading an attachment. Then they capture incidental compromising photos of them, because we all walk naked in front of our computers because our computers are everywhere, and now the computers are increasingly gesture and sound controlled. It's unlikely that in a few years they'll be anywhere that isn't in front of a network camera in your house, because how else will you control your devices with gestures? And having captured those incidental photos as well as their logins and passwords for social media, they try to blackmail them into performing sexual acts on camera in exchange for not disclosing those files. The ratters had as many as 400 victims each. Many of them were minor children. Another ratter who was arrested last year had been blackmailing Cassidy Wolf, who's the former Miss Teen USA. She was, at the time, the Miss Teen USA. He'd done the same thing. The FBI was called in. They caught this guy because he wasn't very smart. And he had over 140 victims, including minor children in the United Kingdom. And so this is a global problem, but the technique that's used there is identical to the technique that's used by the NSA to spy on people through lawful interception technologies, that they want to find vulnerabilities in browsers, they want to find vulnerabilities in operating systems, and they want to leverage those vulnerabilities to attack the owners of computers to spy on them, to catch them and make sure that they're not doing what they don't want them to do. And very often, these vulnerabilities appear in these digital logs because it's against the rules to report a vulnerability in a digital log lest that digital lock be subverted and all the magic copyright smoke disappear out the keyhole. And so over and over again, we are seeing the stakes get higher, and the number of people who have an incentive to want to make it illegal for you to report vulnerabilities in your computer or know what your computer is doing, that pool keeps expanding. And so that, I think, is where we get to when we solve social problems with technology. Because just like digital rights management is a fool's errand, not because the people who want it aren't necessarily goodwill or aren't smart, but because they're trying to do something technically impossible, to have a computer that's sitting in your hands keep a secret from you. Likewise, the problem of the task of solving a social problem by selectively breaking computers is also a fool's errand, because we don't know how to make a computer that can run every program except for the one that pisses you off, right? Our closest approximation is a computer that can run all the programs, that is Turing complete, that is a von Neumann machine, that can run every program we can express in symbolic logic, but that comes with spyware on it out of the box, that watches what you do using a process that is obfuscated from you, and that tries to stop you from knowing what the computer is doing, tries to stop you from killing processes whose sole reason for being on the computer are to control your actions, even when those actions are in your best interest. And I don't think we can solve anything by doing this. I think that the costs of that are always higher than the benefits that we get from it. Now, you may have heard this whole discussion framed as whether or not information wants to be free. I am sometimes identified as being with the information wants to be free crowd. But information and I, we went away to the Cotswolds earlier this spring. We rented a lovely 15th century manor house. We sat in a great fire room and drank oaky Chardonnay. We talked about our parents and we wept. And then at the end of it, information gave me a long soulful hug and confessed to me that all it really wants is for us to stop anthropomorphizing it. Because information doesn't want to be free. Information is a distraction. It wants nothing. But people want to be free. And the way you make people free in the 21st century, in a world made up of information technology, is with free access to free and good tools, free and open tools. So the bad news is that policymakers are not going to stop making this mistake anytime soon. Everything we do will have a computer in it, every problem will involve a computer, and every problem will have the identical solution. Make me the Turing complete -1 computer. Make me the computer that runs every program except for the one that frightens me. And whether or not they have the best of intentions or the worst, you know, I'm someone who's quite chary about firearms and worries about 3D printed firearms, but I think that solving that by saying all 3D printers should be designed so that they can't print firearms is an incredibly bad non-solution to that problem. Whether or not they're solving that a good problem or a bad problem, whether they're saying self-driving cars should be able to navigate the streets but not allow boy racers to be idiots and drag race in them, or whether they're saying you shouldn't be allowed to watch movies the way you want, it doesn't matter, because the solution won't work. The solution is a non-solution that creates more harms. So the problem is this delusion that we can make computers that are just a little bit broken. This idea that we can make our networks just a little bit pregnant with these infectious, anti-user, opaque technologies. You know, and we see it repeated again and again in technology circles. Bureaucrats think that you can store everybody's location data for the whole nation, harvest it from phone networks, and it'll never be leaked or misused. They think that you can build backdoors into switches and computers and networks, and they'll only be used by the good guys and not the bad guys. Apple was just outed last weekend at the Hope Conference for putting backdoors into 600 million iPhones. That we can buy breaks, and zero-day breaks in technology, vulnerabilities that have just been discovered that the manufacturer hasn't had a chance to patch, and that governments, rather than insisting that when these are discovered that they be disclosed to the manufacturers so that we can all be made secure, governments can instead create markets to buy these, keep them secret, and weaponize them so that they can attack the bad guys with them. That's a fallacy. We can't strengthen our cybersecurity by weakening the security of everyone who uses computers, even though some of the people who use computers are bad guys who we would like to have weak computers. As masters of the technological universe, as people who have the nous to modify our computers, we are often contemptuous of DRM. We know that we can defeat it with the wave of a debugger, but that doesn't make it harmless. Our complacency about the ways that our computers are broken is the most dangerous thing going, because internet security is a team sport. It doesn't matter how secure you are. It doesn't matter how great your OPSEC is. If everybody you communicate with is storing all your personal information in the clear. I've hosted my own email for going on 15 years now. I have a server in Iraq and Toronto. It's very secure. I pop that mail off of it several times a day. It doesn't live there where anyone can get at it. But everyone I correspond with is a Google user. And all of them are storing copies of my email to them on Gmail where the NSA can come and get it. So here we are, we're building the future. And it's up to us. We can allow the spyware and the rootkits into our computers. We can put motes in their eyes. And we can make a future in which computers become levers that turn petty tyrants into global monsters. Or we can resist. Right? We can refuse to wave our hands at the deluded marketing department, at the silly politicians with their drips, at the Hollywood fat cats who insist that they will abandon the web unless we selectively break it to their specifications. So the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the standards body that makes standards for the web and has historically been the staunchest ally the open web has just agreed that all browsers, all web standards should now incorporate digital rights management to ensure that you're not saving Netflix streams to your hard drive. And shamefully enough, the BBC was a huge mover in making this part of the reality. And what they have done is created long-lived reservoirs of unreportable vulnerabilities in every HTML5 interface in the world, which is meant to be all of them, right? It's meant to be how you control your thermostat, how you control your artificial light, and how you control your car, right? We're trying to get away from apps, away from silos, into true interactivity and open standards, and those open standards are going to include digital rights management, because the World Wide Web Consortium believed Hollywood when Hollywood said it would just leave the web if it didn't get its way. We've been told that this whole thing is a war between extremism and freedom. That the reason that we need to spy on computers is to save the world from extremism. But the Edward Snowden leak showed us that the real extremism that threatens us today is the unforgivable idea that technology is better served when it shackles us than when it liberates us. It doesn't matter to me whether you're using technology to plan a terrorist attack or to spy on everyone in the world in the name of preventing a terrorist attack. Either way, I call you an extremist and on the wrong side of history. It's tempting to frame this question as whether or not technology will free us or whether it will make us less free. But I think those are the wrong questions to ask. Technology is a fact, not a problem. The right question to ask is how we make technology that makes us more free. What interventions can we make to improve the security of the network and to liberate the people who use it? It's important to call out issues in which technology is taking away freedom. We should be on the alert for this, but not because it tells us that technology is the wrong thing to be focusing on, but because it tells us which technology we should be most immediately focused on. And it also helps people understand just how urgent all of this stuff is. When the lawful interception backdoors in our technology that's built in to allow the police forces of legitimate states are being used by dictatorships to mine the social graph of dissidents and figure out who to disappear and who to murder, that's important to know because it increases our sense of urgency, but not because it should give us a sense of despair about the project of making technology into a force for liberation. But in case you had any doubt about how urgent this stuff is, excuse me, it's as urgent as it gets. And in case you're wondering how hard we should all be working on it, you should be working on it as hard as you can. So I'm an artist, as I said, and I make my living in this improbable way, selling entertainment product that helps you while away the long and dismal hours between the cradle and the grave. And I think that all these digital lock stuff are rubbish, and I don't think that they help me out, and I don't think they earn me my living. But even if they did, even if I thought I could never make another penny as a writer without digital locks, without selectively breaking your computer, I would not approve of them. I would go and get a real job, because as much as I like buying my kid shoes, as much as I like being able to pay the rent, I want to bequeath to my child a free world more. There is no way that we can fight oppression without free and open devices and free and open networks that we can trust. So it's up to us to build that freedom layer into the technology that we use every day, the technology that's come to represent the fabric of the world, the nervous system of the 21st century. The good news is that it turns out the universe wants us to have secrets. Information doesn't want anything, but the universe does. It turns out that we can today, using the technology in your pocket, using the technology on your desk, scramble messages in such a thoroughgoing way that no one can descramble them without knowing the key. Now, maybe they can coerce you into giving them the key, but that's a onesie, twosie kind of matter. They can't coerce everyone into giving up the keys to everything. Not even if every hydrogen atom ever made was turned into a computer that labored into the heat death of the universe, could a message that you could scramble in real time on your computer be decrypted without your permission. This is a new thing in the earth. This is a thing that we have never had before, the ability of everyday people to have integrity in their communications, to be able to communicate in private without intervention from the powerful, without intervention from the incumbents. If we put the freedom layer into our devices, if we are secure and private by default in our networks and our technologies, we will make mass surveillance and all that it entails history from the get-go. You aren't able to build devices that are secure if they have backdoors in them to make sure that you're not copying movies in the wrong way. But you also can't conduct blanket surveillance if the cost to surveil someone is $10,000 instead of effectively zero. When a new Gmail user joins Google, the NSA doesn't have to pay any more to spy on that user. But when you add crypto to your hard drive, when you go SSL by default in your web applications, when you start encrypting your email, to get access to you now costs 10 grand, right? No, it doesn't? Well, how's that?
Because they can use, for example, microcode updates on the processor, or if you're running a commercial grade machine, the supervisory AMT processor.
So this is why, for example, the new EFF router operating system uses signed torrent-based firmware updates that compare hashes across the network before they update.
They can control Intel level microcode updates, not firmware updates, processor microcode updates.
Right. So ideally, we would like devices that don't do microcode updates unless we understand what those microcode updates are.
We would.
Right. This is why projects like Bunny Wang's laptop that try to have openness and transparency from the microcode layer up are important. I agree, but it's much more expensive and much more unwieldy to do microcode updates than it is to tap fiber, because we've had massive concentration in telecom sector, and it turns out that you can put 2 or 3 fiber tops down and get an appreciable fraction of the internet in the same way that you can just tap 2 or 3 webmail providers and get an appreciable fraction of all the email on the internet. I'd love to take this up with you more.
Yeah, I mean, I'd assume you combine the two, but we'll talk about it after.
We'll talk about it afterwards. So we have it in our power to secure our devices, to secure our networks, and to secure the way we use them. And even if you are someone with nothing to hide, and I would say especially if you're someone with nothing to hide who doesn't understand why this privacy stuff matters to you, I would urge you to take this stuff seriously. Because if you are lucky enough to have been born with the unearned privilege of having nothing to hide, of being cis enough, of being white enough, of being healthy enough, of being whatever it is enough that makes you feel like whatever it is that other people get to keep secret that you don't have to hide, then you have a duty to your cousins, your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your children, who may have something to hide that they need to hide to get around in society. You have a duty to give them cover, to raise the cost of mass surveillance, and to make the defaults more private, more secure. So, by all means, let us be cyber realists. Let's ask questions, hard questions, about how we secure things down to the middle. But let's be cyber optimists. Let's understand that the reason for that project is to secure the network and to use it to coordinate a struggle for freedom through which we can seize the means of information and use it to free the planet. Thank you. All right.
Take questions,
Yes.
What do you think?
Yep, so encryption. That'll protect the content. What about the metadata?
So it depends. In some cases, I think we can. So, for example, email, I think, is just probably a dead letter in terms of controlling metadata.
Fair enough.
This is why I think we're seeing zero-knowledge, perfect forward secrecy chat protocols proliferate at by people who seriously ask that question. Right? It's why OTR and why, Wicker, which I declare an interest, I'm an advisor to them. But there are lots of these things that are popping up all over the place. And the good news is that, after the Snowden leaks, there was this Pew study in September last year that found that 87% of Americans had taken some affirmative step to protect their privacy in the 3 months since the Snowden leaks. And of course, everything they did was useless, right? Because there's no box you can tick on any commercial software or hardware that ticks privacy, right? I mean, most of them are just there to kind of confuse and baffle you. But Lessig talks about the 4 forces that act on the world: markets, code, norms, and law. And one of the things that we got out of this was norms and markets, because all of a sudden VCs in Silicon Valley who don't care which side of the surveillance business model they're on. They're not on the surveillance business model because they're ideologically committed to surveillance. They're on the surveillance business model because they're ideologically committed to getting rich. And so they said, wait a second, 87% of American internet users want a product that no one's selling them. That's a product we can make, and so did the foundations. And I don't think that there was anything transcendently difficult about most of what we call security. There are elements of it that require certain expertise, but just like before desktop publishing, everything involved in typesetting was esoteric, because you could assume that everybody who ever wanted to typeset already knew about typesetting. In the same way, almost everything in crypto tools assumes that anyone who understands technology well enough to understand why they need crypto is someone who doesn't need the underlying primitives explained to them. And I think that while there are still some things in desktop publishing that require skill and nuance to accomplish well, and there will always be things in security that require skill and nuance to accomplish well, that much of what we call security can be accomplished without having to have an enormous degree of technical expertise. I think we can just change defaults.
So, well, there's so many things I'd like to ask about, but let me try this one.
Sure.
So a counter-argument to some of what you've been talking about would be the argument by somebody like Danny Weitzner, saying that while we do want to protect all these freedoms and stuff, this notion that access, blocking your ability to see it, is the only way to protect things is an outmoded concept that's never going to work anymore, using very much the same arguments you gave us at the beginning, and that what we really want to do in the policy and norms and law space is start moving the things that restrict use of data rather than access to data.
Well, I mean, I think in open data that's true, right? I think in open data it's true that you don't need transparency, except to the extent that you want to make sure that your processor is faithfully performing mathematical operations on your data. But if you want to make sure there's not a rootkit in your device, I don't know how you do it without transparency. Right? If it's against the law for me to report a vulnerability in your device, how will you ever?
No, that part we agree with completely. I'm talking more about, for example, encryption of information. So your encrypted emails and things like that. Again, the idea that no one will be able to see what you're saying, but if they do, they're kind of legal to do what they want with it, could be contrasted to the idea of they're going to see it anyway. Let's make it illegal for them to forward it, change it, et cetera, et cetera.
I think he's inserting a logical XOR where you want a logical AND, right? Why is that a choice? Surely what we want is governments to be held to account for misuse of our information. And we want technology that stops governments from misusing our information. Remember, governments aren't the only reason to protect your data, right? Ratters are the other reason you want to protect your data. There isn't a back door that lets the NSA in and keeps the ratter out. I mean, maybe if you have a secret in your sabotage of elliptical curves, then that secret might persist.
No, we all knew. You know that case. I mean, that was the elliptic curve random number generator, and everybody knew it wasn't a secret.
Oh, they didn't know, but they didn't know
the secret, but everybody knew.
That's right. But there's a secret variable that the NSA knows and that nobody else knows. We know it's sabotage for the NSA. It's the one example that I can think of where you can put a backdoor in that only you get to use. But then that assumes that no one at the NSA is going to leak it or is going to do something wrong. And the NSA
They never had leakers.
Yeah, right. But not just leakers. I mean, they had Lovett, right? The NSA talks about two kinds of intelligence. Normally, human, which is what humans tell you, human intelligence, and SIGINT, which is what you get from signals. They had this other thing they called Lovett, which was when young, blokey, creepy security operatives used this bizarre, massive, global-scale security network to stalk women. And it happens so much in this organization with its incredible level of oversight and checks and balances. It happens so much, they had a cute name for it. right? And so the idea that the elliptic curve number will never leak out.
Not only did it happen, so my recollection was that the only people who had been caught doing this were ones that confessed before a lie detector test. They have never actually caught anyone.
They also never bothered to
so
Google how do I beat a lie detector test, because talk about pseudoscience.
Yeah, that didn't work out. No, these are people who were intimidated. The only people they catch are the ones who were intimidated by the lie detector. The rest are all still doing it.
If you need to defeat a lie detector test, clenching your anus rhythmically while taking
I
a
went
lie
to
detector.
Another question?
It's true.
This is why you can't have most things.
Yes, please. Go on.
You spoke about the general rule would be kind of individual control of their own devices, transparency for code that's running elsewhere, run by organisations or governments. What about the kind of edge cases in between there where, say, I walk into an environment that's semi-public, there's an ambient environment with computers running that are maybe tracking my footfall, all that, there's lots of edge cases in between where I'm really stuck as to where and how we should do that.
Actually, I think that the much bigger umbrella that fits under is computers that you don't own that you use. And it's a huge umbrella, right? I mean, it's the NHS's supplied cochlear implant. It's the workplace computer, and so on. And I gave a talk about this at Google and at DEF CON called The Coming Civil War Over General Purpose Computers, which says once we figure out how to make owners control their computers, how do we make sure that owners don't attack users of computers? I don't have a good answer to it. It's a really good research question. I think that we run into a real danger of creating kind of tenant farmers in the digital fields, right? Because increasingly the computer infrastructure we interact with is not going to be computers that we own. I mean, not least because we are inhabiting a world where like the dividends from productivity are axiomatically given over to the owners of capital and not to the people who use the technology to increase productivity. And as a consequence, we have increasing concentration of ownership in every field. This is why you can tap 3 telecoms lines and get everything. This is why you can tap 2 webmail hosts and so on. It's a serious and hard problem, and it's tied up intimately with economic issues and the kind of stuff Piketty was talking about in Capital in the 21st Century, and this increased concentration and ownership. Yeah.
I think there's a problem here that I've had my privacy invaded, not by Facebook, and it hasn't made my life any worse. If anything, slightly more convenient, and I think I object on principle, but then in the same way that I object about the way Amazon treats its workers, but it's so much easier to buy from them.
Yeah, well, so I think that there's a couple of problems with privacy. One is that we are very bad at pricing the net present option on a long future disclosure, right? And so we tend to just miscalculate that stuff, and it's hard to get better at things where the action and the consequences are separated by a lot of time and space. It's hard to improve your batting average at cricket if you swing the bat while closing your eyes and then go home, and then a month later someone comes over and tells you whether or not you hit the ball. And a lot of the times with the privacy disclosures, they happen a long way away, the consequences. I had a teacher when I was in 3rd year who had a baby at hospital, and the marketing people who prowl the maternity boards came by and said, we have this basket with baby grows and formula and nappies and so on. All we want is your kid's name, date of birth, and your address, and we'll stay in touch with you. And as sometimes happens, the baby died not long after, which happens with small children sometimes. And every year on that child's birthday, they got a package from a marketing firm. This is a really hard thing to anticipate, right? It's not a thing people are very good at anticipating from kind of this end of the disclosure, what's going to happen at that end of the action. But even where we are good at it, we don't have tools that let us make good decisions. So like the Facebook privacy dashboard is, I think, best viewed as a Skinner box designed to teach you to undervalue your privacy. And I don't think, and I don't mean that exactly facetiously. I think that they have a building full of social scientists and behavioral economists and researchers who try to figure out how to get you to miscalculate privacy decisions. So even where you have a good intuition, it's hard to make that intuition real. if you withhold your date of birth from Facebook, and Facebook starts deliberately seeding your social graph with people asking quiz questions about the dates of birth of their friends in order to populate a field that's been deliberately left blank by you, how is that possibly an indicator that people aren't good at don't value their privacy, as opposed to an indicator that Facebook is deliberately set out to subvert our ability to value our privacy? And then lastly, I think that there's a huge problem in the way that we teach privacy to kids, which is that the way we keep them safe on the internet is by spying on them. Right? We have parental control software and school control software that takes every click and sends it off to some other company, and to make sure that it's not the wrong click, as though somewhere in the world there's a boiler room full of prudes that's big enough that they can separate the good internet from the bad internet, or that there's a regular expression so nuanced and complicated that it can do the same thing. And what we say to them is your privacy is as precious as your virginity, and when you give it up, you'll never get it back. You mustn't give your private information out. But if you take a single affirmative step to protect your privacy while you're using this computer, you're in huge trouble, because then I can't make sure you're not looking at naked pictures. And so, again, you can't, you know, everything about the way we approach privacy is like thoroughly and horrifically broken. And so I think any generalizations we make about how people view privacy are compromised by this background radiation of commercial interest in subverting it. Do I need to go and get my taxi? I need to go and get my taxi.
Thank you again.
Thank you.